Then I hear other idiotic answers like, the Chinese are building naval vessels, they are projecting naval power. Well, I will believe this. I mean, of course, you're building naval vessels. You're expanding your economy, you're expanding your capacity to project your own power. That is essential. That's what every country must do if it respects its own interests. But I'm going to be worried about Chinese imperialism when I see Chinese vessels outside San Diego and Los Angeles and Chinese army bases next to El Paso on the US-Mexican border. Until we see that, it is ludicrous. You just look at the map of the Pacific and you see American bases everywhere creating choke points for China. And this is their official policy for 40 years. And they have the audacity to say that China is a threat because China is... Anyway, enough time wasted on these non-explanations of the new Cold War. And China needs to be contained. And if you ask them, why does China need to be contained? China doesn't have a history of imperialism. China has absolutely no interest in building military bases on the US-Mexican border, in taking, naval power and projecting it to San Diego or Los Angeles or San Francisco. China doesn't want that. China wants to trade. You know what they say? Yes, we agree. But if we let China become a regional superpower in the Pacific area, in its own area, in its backyard, if we allow China, for instance, to become dominant in the South China Sea and in the Indian Ocean, then China in the future will start trying to do what we have done. And they will become an imperialistic force in the Western Hemisphere, which for them is the Americas. This is what they say. They understand that China is not imperialistic, but they fear that if they do not contain China through choke points, just north of Indonesia, the first array of islands, the second array of islands between China and the Philippines and so on, then China will emulate the United States, and therefore you better prevent that by choking China today. So that's one line of argument. The second line of argument is the opposite argument, that the United States must be a bully everywhere, all over the world, including in Europe, including the Ukraine, and that, for instance, I have been told that by somebody who was very high up in the Bush administration and who was very high up in the chain of command of NATO in Brussels, an American Republican. He said to me that we need to expand NATO against the interests of the Europeans. He was clear, against the interests of the Europeans. And I said to him, Bob, why? He said, because of 3 reasons. First, because we must be in Europe, the United States, to keep ourselves in. Number one reason he gave me. Number two, to keep the Germans down. Look at the price of electricity in Germany today as a result of the war in Ukraine. The German industrial machine is finished, kaput, as a result, not just of that, but that is one of the reasons. And thirdly, to keep the Russians out. So this is, if you were in the corridors of power in Washington, D.C., this is the discussion you would hear. The containment of China, the choking of China, is common ground for all of them. They simply disagree on how to do it best, whether to do it through the war in Ukraine or, as Trump suggests, end the war in Ukraine and concentrate on China. Well, this, so far, what I have presented to you, is more or less common knowledge amongst anyone who's ever been in Washington, been in Brussels, spoken to these people, to the Cold Warriors, to the new Cold Warriors. This is common knowledge. But I think that story that I've given you so far is incomplete. Why did the Clinton administration and the Bush administration after that were so gung-ho about trading with China? Why did they not start the new Cold War against China in the 1990s, in the year 2000, in 2004, 2005, 2008?